Both our models are both free to anyone in the industry in terms of getting a subscription to the magazine. As long as you work in the industry, we will send it to you free of charge. We're monthly on the print side. You also can sign up for our e-letters that way as well. It's on the same kind of menu bar for subscribe. We have 5 of those a week for QSR every morning, and then 4 a week every morning from the FSR side.
Welcome to Whisking It All with your host, Angela Esposito, co-founder of Whisk.ai, a food and beverage intelligence platform. We're going to be interviewing hospitality professionals around the world to really understand how they do what they do. Welcome to another episode of Whisking It All. We're here today with Danny Klein, Editorial Director at QSR and FSR magazines. Danny, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's anyone who's on top of the industry, both on the QSR and FSR side, it's probably you. I follow you on LinkedIn. You're always posting super interesting things. So really maybe to start off for our audience, can you maybe just go back and maybe give us a story of what led you to become, the editorial director at QSR and FSR magazines?
Yeah, it's I've told this story to some people. It's a little convoluted, but yeah. So basically, I went to school for journalism. I was actually my father's idea. I wanted to become a zookeeper, but when I told him that, he thought I was kidding. So that response at that time, when I was 18, 17, whatever it is, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. I was joking. Yeah. And I was, journalism was kind of a natural thing for me. He was, I was always a writer, and he was just somebody that really saw this version of me of being a sports writer. He used to read me columns in like the New York Daily News and things like that, and Mike Lupica, and he would just say things like, "You'll do better someday." So then when it got time to college, I basically became a journalist for him. And so sports writing was really the first thing I did. I did that throughout college. That was the track that I was on at the University of Florida, and then spent about 10 years or so doing so in Florida, different newspapers. I worked at a small daily in St. Augustine, Florida, kind of a beach town near Jacksonville. I did that for a long time, almost 7 years. I was the sports editor there for about a year and a half. Went on to the Daytona Beach News Journal, doing similar things, covering mostly high schools, once in a while getting into colleges, professional, very, here and there. And then, once in a while doing NASCAR when you're up in, Daytona. That's just kind of the part of it. But anyway, like a lot of people in newspapers, I got to a point where the industry got a little bit dicey there. I was part of a group of a department that was being outsourced to Texas and laid off after my newspaper had been acquired by Gatehouse, which is sort of like a larger conglomerate throughout the Southeast and other places. And
Got it.
I ended up not losing my job, but in that period of time, I was looking for jobs, assuming I was about to be, fired. And my wife actually came across, where I work now, which at the time was called Food News Media, and sent it to me. She wanted to move to North Carolina, which is where it's based. Beyond that, knew nothing about the industry, about FSR magazine, which was where I started, about B2B, journalism in general, or really anything. It was more just like, well, I like the word food is in here. We all eat. I know you want to move to North Carolina, and I'm about to be laid off, so I'm going to apply to this job, and, we'll see what happens. And, somehow I got, through the interview and was very, very surprised to get the call back, with the job offer. And in the process of coming up here originally, really fell in love with the company and the culture. It was a very small organization, that was family run at the time, and, just really loved everybody. It was just such a 180 from what I was used to in the newspaper business, which, we were in this like building that looked like a condemned middle school, and everybody was miserable. And I came over here and they were having this, they were doing what they did monthly at the time, which was take, everybody out to lunch for somebody's birthday. And I was just like, man, this is just such a different vibe. And the magazines were beautiful, and the office was so nice. And Chapel Hill, which is where it's located, was also really a great place. And so, I was like, well, even though I'm not getting laid off, I'm going to go take this other job because I think you sent me a pretty clear signal that this is not a good idea to stay here. And secondly, this just looks like a cool opportunity. So I really got into it kind of sideways there, and then, kind of jumped right into the fire. Well, the very first story I ever wrote was this 5,000 word feature for the magazine on how restaurant groups scale. And it was very intimidating. I mean, a lot of my colleagues love to tell this story that my first day there, I mean, I was legitimately terrified. I had moved my family up here, all these different things, and they handed me this 7-page booklet of tasks and things I would be working on. And as I began to read through it, I realized I didn't know how to do literally any of the stuff. I didn't know the subject matter. I didn't know the technicalities of what the role entailed. And, I went home and cried. So my colleagues always like to remind me that I cried on my first day of work here. But with that said, the very first person I ever interviewed completely changed my outlook on the industry right away and what I would be doing, because the guy was in his basement building the restaurant that I was interviewing him about. And it was just such a good peek into kind of what I would come to appreciate about hospitality, that you have people who you have to be invested to, up to your neck in this to be willing to deal with all the stuff that you have to. So everybody who lives within this world of restaurants tends to be very passionate about what they do, which is great from my perspective, and also really good people. I mean, I will tell you that, obviously there are your exceptions to that here and there, but the vast majority of people who work in restaurants, and I think it's because they have that kind of mindset of serving a guest. Yeah. They're just such good people compared to sports. The sports industry is just filled with people who are a little bit on the edge of sanity. So it has turned out to be an amazing thing. And like I said, right away, talking to that guy, I felt better about things and just evolved. And my current role came about maybe, I think at this point it's been two years-ish or something like that. I had gone from working as an associate editor at FSR magazine, which is our full service publication, to being in charge of our digital properties for over 6 years, which was a new role for us as kind of a reflection of what was happening in media. And then my current role, when my former boss moved on to another publication, I stepped into that. So that's how I got here. I know that was a somewhat long story, but it's been really a life-changing thing, to put it lightly. I mean, it really changed so much of my life. It gave me normal hours. I was able to have children, because working in a daily newspaper in sports, I was working 4 to midnight, never saw my wife. Now I work Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Things do not happen after 5 o'clock. And if they do, it's okay. You could wait. And, it was just one of the better decisions that I ever made, even though I made it without having any idea what I was doing.
Right. No, that's super interesting. Like jumping in without, knowing anything about the industry. But I think the same way you fell in love with the industry is what happens to a lot of people, because it's like hospitality is a pretty special thing. And when you think about it, a lot of like the best moments, whether it's personal or maybe with your wife or maybe with a group of friends or celebrating something, are at these kind of venues, one way or another. Like things happen, celebrations happen, these memories happen. And so it's like, there's something special there. And then I agree with you, just kind of expand on that point, that on the
owner side, the hospitality side, there is something special about like their passion and their love for what they do. And it's kind of contagious. It's kind of contagious in a way, which on my side is why I love what, we're in the tech side, but helping restaurants, but same thing. I'm just passionate about helping these people because they are so passionate about what they do. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's 100% correct. I, had the very surreal pleasure of, interviewing Andrew Cathy, the CEO of Chick-fil-A, last September for the keynote of the very first event that we ever threw. And, it's just, I mean, first of all, I remember sitting there the night before thinking, how in the world did I end up here? how did I go from that story that I just told you to interviewing the CEO of Chick-fil-A in front of 900 people? But again, to what we were just talking about, the way that he talks and the things that matter to him, in that company, it's just such an infectious thing, to your point. People ask me all the time about them specifically of like how are they all so friendly, and how part of it is training, of course. And, they're sort of their high standard for the way that their employees are and the,
right.
Accountability for it.
Right.
You're not going to go work there and not be that way. It's just not going to be a thing, but it's gotten to a point now where, he was talking about this. It's really about the operator, the owner operator. They have to be that kind of person. And then they tend to hire that kind of person. But more even so than that, if you go to work there now, you just kind of know you have to be that way. And so it's like, that's what you already bought into because their culture is so deep
right.
and rooted in something very specific of being, just friendly, that you're not necessarily going to go work there unless that's the type of person that you are. So that, to your point, is pretty special. I mean, you just don't see that kind of thing in most industries because they can't live that day in and day out the way that a company who feeds people does. And so, it's a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then like, I can only imagine what were maybe some of the things that stood out apart from culture and it sounds like that's obviously something that Chick-fil-A does really well. But now that you mentioned it, it's super cool that you interviewed the CEO. Was there anything else that really stood out that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, it was such an interesting conversation in so many ways. And one of the moments that a lot of people have talked to me about even now. I mean, I just saw a post on LinkedIn about this literally yesterday from the CEO of Big Chicken, which is a fast casual that's growing, that Shaquille O'Neal owns, right, or at least is part involved in or whatever. But yeah, so he mentioned, Andrew Cathy, that one thing that he does is he reads his children books at night about how to read a P&L. And so when he said that at the time, I didn't know if he was kidding. He was like, was he making a joke? So I asked him about that on stage, and he was totally serious as something that he had been brought up in that world, and Dan Cathy and so forth, it kind of instilled in him. And so I made a comment on stage at the time about how I read my son this book about owls, and this, what does that mean? My child is going to grow up to be. And it was just kind of a funny light moment in between all the things he was talking about. But his famous line from that keynote was, he had, going back to what I was saying a minute ago, he had this thing where he was saying that cared for people care for people, and so in the time that he had said that, a lot of people started posting it online, and I posted the video, a couple weeks later, and that line really resonated with a lot of folks. And again, it's not a complicated thing, but it's just more, if you're a franchise organization, you cannot really control how your operators hire, and you can't control the way that they manage some of those things. You can give them guidance and, what have you. But, that's the whole nature of a franchise system, is the owner operator. And so the idea at Chick-fil-A is really to care for that owner operator, and then these cared for people will care for people. And again, that kind of goes down the ladder of the hourly crew member to, the people that, you don't see in the back. Again, it's just a kind of a model of hospitality. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of, but he told the whole story of Chick-fil-A at the beginning. It was an interesting thing because I had talked to him a little bit, kind of maybe like a couple weeks before, and I didn't really know what he was like though, because I never had a long conversation with him.
Right.
And somebody was asking me that morning as I'm standing there in the back of the room, like, what kind of guy is he? Is he going to be really talkative? Is he going to be short with you? And I'm like, I have literally no idea. And I asked him this first question, and he just talked for like 11 straight minutes.
That's awesome.
Telling the story of his father and grandfather. And so then at that point I was like, okay, well, this is going to be good. And he went into telling the story about how he was a football coach and how he came up in the business because, they made him work in the business. He didn't just become CEO. He was an operator. He worked in the corporate level. He was out in South Africa, and so he had gone through a lot of levels in the organization. And I went to visit Chick-fil-A, not to turn this into an entirely Chick-fil-A podcast, but a couple months ago, I just kind of went down to headquarters, and there are a lot of Cathys who work there. I did not know that. They work at a lot of different functions, but the model being that, they don't just ascend, they all come up through a system to get them to where they are. And so again, it's just a really well run organization that cares about the right things. And then, then you sit there and they go, okay, well, they made $18 billion in sales last year across 2,700 locations, which is astronomically crazy, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's how they did it.
I love it.
It's an amazing story. Probably, of those in the last 20 years in the industry, it's just hard to rival that one.
Yeah, no, super, super interesting. And for people who want to check that out, including myself, is that interview online? Because this sounds like something I'd love to check out.
I only have one clip online. I didn't share the whole thing for various reasons.
Okay.
But with that said, on a shameless moment of plugging,
please.
So that conference, as I mentioned, was the first year that we ever did that. And that was last September in Atlanta. Yeah. It's called the QSR Evolution Conference, which was the process of putting that thing together and launching it from the ground up was something that aged me greatly, but the payoff was amazing. Like I said, with interviewing him, getting him the keynote, it was unbelievable. I never thought that was going to happen when I first reached out, and so that really set the tone for
not bad for the first
incredible
year,
thing,
right?
and we had so many speakers. It was that was kind of how we wanted to differentiate ourselves, or we were going to really make it very content heavy, which is kind of how we operate as a magazine too. But so we had 161 speakers, and
wow.
And 159 of them showed up, which was amazing. And one of them had COVID, and the other, I don't remember what happened.
Wow.
But the news there is that I'm about to open registration for year 2 on March 1st, probably. Okay. So be on the lookout for that. I do know who the keynote is. I have not announced it yet. I'm in the process of making some graphics and things, but be on the lookout for that. I mean, this might air after that news, but
this will probably air in a couple of weeks. But for people who want to check it out, can you maybe what will be the link they can go to kind of learn about the conference or sign up or register?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the best thing to do would just be to follow me on LinkedIn and just kind of wait for it.
Yeah.
If you want to reach out to me directly that way, I can do so as well. There is a QSR Evolution website for it specifically, which is just QSR. Let me check what it is exactly.
Yeah, just to make sure we don't put people in the right path. But
it's QSREvolutionConference.com. But again,
if not personal LinkedIn,
you would just be refreshing that. So the best thing really to do is just to follow me and wait for me to.
Perfect.
Because once it's announced, I will, I'll go with it. So best way is just to follow me and
I love that.
Stay tuned.
I love it. So you heard it at QSRevolutionconference.com or just follow Danny Klein on LinkedIn and he'll announce that. That's exciting. If it's coming up in September, depending where it is it going to be Atlanta, same thing in Atlanta?
Yeah, it's going to be in Atlanta again. Yeah. Same date range. It's the week of Labor Day. So it's the 4th and 5th.
Got it.
The only difference being that we put it in a larger hotel because we're actually, so last year it was 2 conferences in one venue. It was the QSR Evolution Conference and then what we called the Next Gen Restaurant Summit, which is just full service basically.
Got it.
So it's kind of what we identify as the emerging brands within the full service space. We call them Next Gens.
Very cool.
But again, it was just more like but they lived in the same venue. You got one ticket. You can go to whatever track you wanted.
That's cool.
We just branded them separately for marketing purposes and also to just make it so that, if you were interested in one side of the industry and not the other, you didn't have to go to, you didn't have to listen to full service stuff if you didn't want to.
Right.
Which again is how we operated as an organization, which is really difficult at times since nobody else tries that. Everyone else sends like one email in the morning and we send 2, but we do that so that we can speak to a very specific group. But anyway, the point is we're adding a 3rd show this year, which is it's going to be called the Pizza Power Forum.
Okay.
It comes from a magazine that came into our family of brands about a year ago, PMQ. So they're going to have a track at the show too. So we're going to a larger venue, the Marriott Marquis, so that we can house 3 events instead of 2.
Okay, wow.
So it's gonna be even bigger, I guess, is the theme to take away from this.
Very cool. And look, when we publish this, we publish on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, all that stuff. Also throw it in our newsletter. So we'll definitely reconnect. And when it's live, if we could throw in some type of promo code to the listeners or something. It doesn't have to be a promo code. It could be something else, but we'll definitely link details of the event. So we have a cool, big restaurant audience. So happy to help and to add some visibility. And I know that QSR is celebrating their, I think, 27th year and FSR their 12th year. So I'd love to know, and this might be a loaded question so we can dissect it, but how have you seen the restaurant industry evolve, during your time at these publications? So like we can maybe like do some highlights of like how you see maybe the QSR side evolve and then maybe a couple highlights on the FSR side, because we have a lot of restaurant operators and owners that listen in, and I'd love to just hear your take on the evolutions that you have been seeing on both QSR and FSR side.
Yeah, I mean, it has definitely been a lot of things. So I've been here about 9 years now, and I think like most people in this industry, we live in 2 spaces in our brains right now. When I got here, it was always, you'd always write these things like before the recession and after the recession kind of thing. And what was interesting about that though, is that from a restaurant perspective, it wasn't great for some people, but for the most part, the industry was relatively recession proof. That's just one of the things about it, because people have to eat, and then they have this whole lipstick effect thing, where people might cut back on more expensive things in their lives, like going to Disney World, but, they'll replace it by going to dinner with 4, and so the industry changed a lot out of that time. But what was different then is what kind of happened was you saw a lot of larger chains kind of become over leveraged and start to retract, especially in casual dining. And then what you saw in response was you saw this wave of fast casual growth. That was the big story in like 2010. Right. You had this entrepreneurial movement happening at this other side of the quick service spectrum. Right. And, we started to call it fast casual 2.0. So, essentially giving a moniker to a brand who is even a step above, the quality growth that Chipotle basically introduced into counter service. And then you started to see brands like Modern Market and Sweet Green and things like this. So these were what we were calling 2.0s, that they were and they were opening like crazy. And we opened, we launched this report called the 40-40, where, we basically take 40 of them under 40 units every year. And we've been doing that for 8 straight years now.
Oh, wow.
To kind of give you the scope of how many of them. However, so that to me was like the post-recession story, was that you had a lot of bankruptcies happening because the money that came into the sector at times was, a little bit cheap, and it didn't, you had a lot of debt pile up for some brands who couldn't support it in the end. And so you got to start to see a lot of larger brands go bankrupt. And even in the QSR space, there wasn't a ton of growth happening at that kind of level. I mean, McDonald's, they just grew for the first time this past year. And I don't remember off the top of my head of what it was, but it was many years.
Right.
And that was kind of the story. It was like, okay, well, the financial implications and what's happened here and the rent. And then you had fast casual start to flood these inline locations instead of drive-thrus and so on and so forth. And it spurred this explosion of that side of the industry. Now, again, to go back to what I said at the beginning, now we split our lives in the pre and the post-COVID conversation.
Right. Yeah, everything's pre and post-COVID, so true.
Right. And so COVID was an entirely different effect. It was nothing like the recession. I remember at the time you would sometimes see comparative kind of looks from that view, and it never made any sense for restaurants. The pandemic was more like a disaster event. It was like a hurricane, coming and, causing a disaster in the city versus a recession, because again, you had to do all these crazy things like close the dining rooms and then open them at 25%, put plexiglass up, have servers who are, wearing masks and then putting, taking the tables off the menu, all these different things that were happening that were so unnatural to the way that the experience existed.
Right.
And so the effect on the industry, at that time and at the whole was just nothing like a recession. And what ended up happening was almost like the reverse. And so what you see now is you see brands like, Burger King's parent yesterday, this is February 15th, outlining they're going to get to 40,000 locations. McDonald's put that number at 50,000. Domino's, I think, at 55,000. Starbucks at 55,000. Chipotle up their number to 7,000. And so on and so forth, right? So, why that happened is, again, it's kind of like looking at this in reverse, where they were able to secure capital during the early COVID days. They pulled these revolvers out and did all sorts of things, and were able to really withstand the effect early on, more so than a full service restaurant, and definitely more so than an independent. And then they all recovered a lot quicker than we expected, or that anybody expected. I mean, quick service was back on its feet literally within months because of the drive-thru.
Yeah, curbside pickup and all that.
Yeah, curbside, takeout, delivery, all these things that was just seamless for them to get involved in.
Right.
Most of them were already talking about it, or, as we always used to say, COVID was not really an inventor of trends for the quick service industry. It was just an accelerant. And so that's a much better place to be than, again, if you're a fine dining restaurant and you're trying to put all your customers into an igloo outside and some of this crazy stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
And so,
the inside of the outside, right? Like when you think about it, it made no sense, right?
Yeah, I know. I remember seeing, I think it was a Red Robin, and this is not a knock on them. They were just doing what they were allowed to do, but they had like a big tent outside near me, and I was like, that doesn't seem safer. but I get what's going on. And so again, what ended up happening there is that's what really triggered what's going on now. Is you're starting to see a lot of, at least from a unit expansion level, growth from kind of the big getting bigger, and franchise growth is also holding steady, because the line to capital is a lot easier if you're trying to grow a franchise than it is if you're trying to open your own concept.
Right.
And so it's really stunted some of that entrepreneurial type of fast casual expansion.
Right.
And then at the same time, a lot of those brands struggled pretty mightily through that stretch and are still trying to recover. Same thing with independents. And so now, I do think they're going to come back, especially fast casual. You're already seeing it now. But what's really interesting about all of that is that it's not necessarily what the market commanded. It wasn't like the customer asked for this. I would say in 2010, there was a little bit of that because global menus, higher food quality, brands of sustainability, things like that. And that was a lot of what like a younger generation was looking for. Like if you look at how Shake Shack grew, it was like they were kind of built to being the quick service for a changing generation. And
right.
And that was really what gave a lot of credence to some of these brands popping up in like urban centers and being so successful. But like you look at it now and people love independent restaurants. It's not like we don't want more independent restaurants in our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It isn't being driven necessarily by the market as much as by, what happened, and what the current cost to operate business is. Of course, as that's the topic now is just the price of everything. And so, the broader theme is it's like the guest counts across the industry right now are a little bit strained, especially in January.
Right.
And most of the growth that you see now is coming from price. And there is getting to a point now where I was talking to someone recently about this and in an article that we posted, and it's just like there's nothing left to trade down to. It's like the industry is going to have to solve that problem at some point.
Right.
When you have McDonald's, telling investors that they're shedding, visits from the 40,000 and under income demographic, that's a little bit of a canary in the coal mine because no one would have ever thought that would be happening. Right. And so now,
that's crazy.
And then and they've been balancing it out by people trading down into McDonald's out of like casual dining and what have you, or even fast casual, which has become, $14, $15 average checks. And at some point, for McDonald's, it's, and they know this. I mean, they talked about what they're going to do to draw that group back, but they're not going to continue to bank on that being the reason that they grow. The people trading out of casual and higher priced restaurants. It's
right.
Because that's just not who they are. And so that's kind of where we're at now is it's like most brands are not growing traffic. Some are, Texas Roadhouse is, as I wrote this morning. So is Chipotle. And part of that, I think, is because they're a little bit higher priced, and their quality proposition is very clear. And if you kind of price like at Chipotle right now, say it's like $12, $14, right? Yeah. The gap between them and McDonald's now is not what it used to be.
Agreed.
I mean, yeah. And so I think that's actually helping them and helping brands like them because the guests are able to kind of be like, well, McDonald's costs $8, $9, $10. If I want to order for delivery, it's $15.
Exactly.
And Chipotle has sort of been, responding with they've got over 800 of these pickup lanes where you could order and pick up, to pay the extra price. And so that's kind of technology. Like Shake Shack has 30 drive-thrus now. And so these things are blurring the lines of convenience and it's helping, some, brands while straining others. And that's not to say McDonald's is struggling. They're doing the opposite of that, but they are in the midst of, evolving to that,
right.
What kind of value can they bring back, because it has made the sector a pretty interesting place right now. McDonald's has done their top line in the past 4 years has been as impressive as any restaurant chain in America. It's just, what does the future look like? And that I think is where we're headed right now. You're going to see a different definition of value. And I think most likely through digital, through what do you get for what you give? If you're giving somebody an email or frequency, what kind of offer you get in response, what kind of menu innovation is going to meet this. And then at the same time, seeing brands like Wendy's and, others just, Burger King really improve the way the restaurant looks, how much technology is in the drive-thru so that if you are paying more money, you're going to have a better experience instead of kind of the old trade-off of let me just do this as fast as possible so I can get fed for as cheap as possible, because that's no longer really a proposition for a lot of people.
Interesting.
A long answer, but it was a complex question.
No, I love it. I love it. So there was a lot of good information there. So like that's super interesting. Like you had me engaged the whole time. And it's funny when you mentioned about like independent restaurants, and like it made me think. It's like, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, but like when I think about, cool cities worldwide, that's something that makes a city cool, apart from its history, is the fact that there is a lot of independent restaurants, right? Like it's a difference between like going to Montreal, that's where I grew up, let's say, and there's a lot of cool independent restaurants, or going to New York, right? Versus going to maybe a city where it's only chains. And so there's something to be said about like, that mix of what people want. And I think that's probably a big driver of like tourism and what makes something cool. But on the flip side, there's just the unit economics. So it's like balancing like cool places and cool restaurants, but also it's really hard to do it independently. So you're seeing more and more chains and franchises, but it's like, do people really want that, right?
Yeah, and that's, so this thing that we call next gen casual, as I briefly hinted before, a lot of that is a response to that. So it's kind of like this idea that you might be a chain, but you kind of look and feel like an independent. Leave a little bit of scale and leverage to be able to survive some of these things, but your restaurants look different. Like we like True Food Kitchen's kind of a good example, or like a Tupelo Honey, where they don't look like they fit the market that they open in. The food comes out nice, the plates, the presentation, they've got chef driven things from the beverage side to the food side. And so we've seen that, as kind of like a kickback of the difficulties to run an independent restaurant. But yeah, that was the great tragedy of COVID, was what it did to independent restaurants. And what's frustrating about it now, and I mean, through those years, it was just like one ridiculous thing after another in terms of like federal aid and all this kind of stuff. There were different state by state regulations that a lot of times made no logical sense, and the way that they were handing out money. And I mean, it was just there's so much advocacy happening at the time, and left a lot to be desired in the end. But even now, I mean, there are things now. We were writing a little bit about it this week. Just things like the tip credit, and so Washington D.C. is kind of in this process of phasing that out. And again, it's like a regulatory move where, basically they don't want people to pay servers $3-4 an hour, as historically has been the case, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is by state. Even though the rule always required restaurants to cover that up to minimum wage through tips. If they didn't, they had to pay for it. And it was a system that worked forever. The idea of phasing it out is such a misguided and absurd concept that it's forcing people to close and lay off employees in DC like crazy, and it's killing independents because they can't pay $17-20 an hour to a server. And on top of that, the server doesn't want to make that anyway, because they were making way more than that before. So then you end up with all these things like, are we going to tip pool? Can you even tip pool in this state? And it's just I posted this on earlier in the week, where it's just like a lot of times people make laws who don't actually spend any time in a restaurant.
Right.
And if you did so, you would know that nobody is asking to get rid of the tip credit. Same with like the joint employer thing that's going on now. So independence joint employer is more for franchises, but actually to a degree you would consider that an independent problem, because a lot of franchisees are actually just independent restaurateurs who are running a corporate, location or a brand with a corporate banner.
Right.
So, again, it's just independents always face these things on a daily basis that are really crazy, like the commodity inflation and the things going on in rent in some cities like New York. And not to get on a soapbox, but it's just like they a lot of times, and I've talked to many of them who tell me this, where it's just like they look down the pipe at what they're going to have to do, financially speaking, and they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And so they sell, they back out, they go join a larger group, whatever it might be. It doesn't benefit literally anybody, because to your point, they make every market that they're in better. Even for chains, there's an upside to having that in whatever place you want to open. I've never heard a chain tell me like, I want more independence to close. Right. I guess they wouldn't come out and say that outright, but but still, broadly speaking, it's sad. I mean, the challenges that they get hit with are
it's tough,
unfair. That's the thing about COVID is like, I remember talking to the NRA at the time, or National Restaurant Association, not the gun lobby, and they were just saying, well, most independents have like 2 weeks of cash on hand, and that sounds alarming, but it really isn't, because that's just how they ran. They were happy enough being able to pay themselves, their employees, month to month, and living the life that they had dreamed of living. They weren't meant to cash bank accounts with $50 million in them. And so this idea of you've got to close or you got to go to 25% for 6 months, and I mean, it just was never realistic.
Yeah.
And then they tried to go to delivery and they got just completely gouged by aggregators and so on and so forth. And, there was a place by my house that, they tried to, I remember I ordered one time because they were having like a support us night, and, it was like a duck breast came in a plastic container, and it was just terrible, and you didn't get the experience of sitting in there and what it smells like and what it looks like and the service. And they just could not live within that world. And
it's tough.
And they're going to come back, and they are, and they're always going to be wanted, and they'll always be successful. But they just have to face so many trials. And, that's one of the things we try to do. I mean, we try to write about it and be an advocate for them.
Awesome.
And it's just, it just never ends.
Yeah, I hear you. And on the switching gears a bit on the tech side, I know like all these things have evolved, and you kind of alluded to it, but post COVID, a lot of things were accelerated on the QSR side. But I'm curious also about the FSR side. So just maybe like touch on a couple of different technologies or trends you've seen tech-wise, both on the FSR side and maybe on the QSR side. I think QSR side is a bit more obvious, but I'd still love to hear some interesting things you've seen. I think, like, if I'm not mistaken, one of my previous guests was talking about how Chipotle has like an automatic avocado cutter slices, tech like that. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are some technology trends you've seen?
Yeah, well, I'll say so full service, and this is true of most the industry, like the Chipotle's avocado cutting. I can't remember the pun exactly.
It was a good name. Yeah, I remember it was a good name, but I can't remember the name. Yeah.
The avocado, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, like that. So that they're about to test that in one location. So, but those type of robotics and really sexy, kind of cool technologies, they have, they kind of happen here and there, and they're awesome. But the vast majority of technology in the restaurant industry is not that flashy, and in full service in particular, because a lot of the operators want some invisible tech. They kind of balance it out. Like Texas Roadhouse yesterday, they were talking about they're putting KDSs into their restaurants. And this is something that First Watch has been doing in the past couple of years as well. Makes all the sense in the world, right? Especially from the perspective of the employee, because that kind of what you expect to see on TV, where they're putting the ticket into to like the little whatever you would call that, and they're spinning it, and then the chef is yelling, and it's just it just creates complete and utter chaos. And in some places that's cool. That's kind of like what it is. But like in a place like Texas Roadhouse, there's no upside to that. And so a KDS is just a great concept for them. And then the other technology that they're using on the other half of that is they're doing table pay, pay at the table kiosks. And that's been a big full service thing that kind of emerged as well, because there are a lot of experiences in the full service space that I don't think everyone wants to be tech fixed.
Yep.
There are some people who hate QR codes, some who like them, but there are very few people who have a problem with not giving their credit card to a server or having to flag them down or wait for them and things like that. So I think that's a technology you're going to continue to see more of. And you see that both at the table, like in their case, and then you see it in the hands of the servers themselves.
Right.
I think there's a lot of room to grow that. I think right now that remains a little bit clunky.
Yep.
And a lot of restaurants haven't really figured out like how to do that, and kind of, because it's weird. It's like you put it in front of the customer and you usually like stand over their shoulder while they pick how much they're going to tip you. Yeah. I've been to a couple of places recently where they just like put it down and walk away, and I like that. But again, there's room to grow that technology. And so that one I think you're going to see a lot of, and also even in the case of like another Broken Egg and some other brands who have servers with handhelds while they take your order, which has a lot of benefits too, because you're able to, in that case, if you're trying to train somebody, they can see the menu like right in front of them, right? They're not trying to, you're not constantly trying to have everybody memorize every single special. So I think there's a lot of room to grow that too. That's not going to work for every brand. But for somebody who moves a lot of volume at a day part like brunch, makes all the sense in the world. And then it's stuff that's just kind of happening behind the scenes. There's AI and automation entering like the scheduling space and the inventory space, and things to make the lives of a GM easier, or even an independent restaurateur, and somebody who maybe wants to go greet guests instead of crunching that kind of stuff all the time. And that's all really exciting technology, and probably going to be pretty ubiquitous within a certain period of time. But outside of that, I mean, I would say those are kind of the main full service things right now. Yep. There are obviously a multitude of other things that, as I'm sure but those are the ones that I would say that I see the most of right now is either handheld technology, pay at the table technology, and KDS. Those are kind of like the trio of things. And I talked to someone the other day who had one of those robot servers from Bear Robotics. It's super cool, but that you have to have a very specific operation.
Right.
And those are gonna work for some people and not for others. Probably be amazing in hotels, but yeah, it's a never-ending thing, for sure.
Right. No, and we've seen that too. Like on our side, like the mission at Whisk has always been, and you kind of alluded to it, but just giving restaurateurs or time back to focus on the things they love. So really, it's like, I always joke around. It's like we help with a lot of just the boring back of house stuff, which is boring but necessary. But inventory, ordering, invoice management from your suppliers, recipe costs, all this stuff that's like necessary, and everyone's somewhat doing, whether it's on other systems or on pen and paper. But it's like, how can we make it just a little less painful so they can just get time back? And I think, like, to me, those are like, I love those types of tech because it's really helping these people. And it might not be the sexiest thing, like inventory is not sexy and invoicing is not sexy, but it's mass audience, like everyone kind of needs it. Where to your point, sometimes you kind of have these niche things that a small percentage, and they make the news because they're interesting and the robotics, but it's a much smaller audience maybe adopting these things.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was listening to White Castle give a presentation on technology at a conference, which was amazing. They were talking a lot about Flippy the robot, the burger flipping, or actually doesn't flip burgers in their case. It cooks the onion rings and stuff. Okay. But anyway, they were talking about it for a long time, and it's incredible. And they're kind of like the big case study for it, and they're about to scale it, or maybe they're in the process of it. I haven't heard an update in a little while. But anyway, they were going on about it for like 40 minutes, amazing questions back and forth from the crowd. And somebody was just like, how many stores is it in? And the answer is 10. And I was like, I thought it was in 10 like 3 years ago. But again, so that's just a much slower burn. And it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in specific places like Chipotle's avocado cutting robot. And then, now they're also doing the digital make line. I haven't heard them recently talk about the, tortilla chip cooking robot.
Yeah.
But, these things, again, like inventory and those kind of technologies, those are always going to actually be more vivid and present. It's just that, they don't gain the same kind of headlines.
Right.
But that stuff is fun to talk about, and somebody is going to do it and do it in a way that helps them. But yeah, I think the broader industry trends and the things that are actually happening and optimizing on a broad scale right now are actually things like what you said, and technology that's happening to make lives easier for other tasks versus some of these cooler type of headlines that we read.
That's awesome. And then last but not least, I could listen to you all day because you have so much knowledge, and because you're writing these stories and you're like up to date on all these brands and the industry. So it's so interesting. So for people who want to check out these publications, follow you on LinkedIn. I want to give you a chance just to plug everything, the QSR side, the FSR side, your personal LinkedIn, because you're a wealth of knowledge. So please feel free to plug away.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, just follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not really into any other social platform at the moment. I used to have a Twitter presence, but I let that die for a lot of reasons. Yeah, it's just too crazy out there, and I couldn't drive any traffic really. Anyway, that's another story. But
and then on the QSR, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say the website. No, I was just going to say QSRmagazine.com, FSRmagazine.com. We are both. So our models are both free to anyone in the industry in terms of getting a subscription to the magazine. As long as you work in the industry, we will send it to you free of charge. We're monthly on the print side. You also can sign up for our e-letters that way as well. It's on the same kind of menu bar for subscribe. We have 5 of those a week for QSR every morning, and then 4 a week every morning from the FSR side. So a lot of different things. Like I said, we got the event coming up actually here in 2 weeks. I think we may probably either right when this airs or right before. We're having an event called the Women in Restaurant Leadership Summit, which is the first time we've ever done that. That's coming up here on February 28th. So I'm kind of gearing up for that now, but you could always become a part of that if you're interested. Cool. It's kind of a movement that we're starting to build. That's a story. I love it. Well, you heard it here. Check out Danny Klein on LinkedIn. Check out QSRmagazine.com, FSRmagazine.com, both the Women in Tech event and their other event coming up in September. So he'll be launching that beginning of March, or not launching, but announcing it. So follow him on LinkedIn, Danny Klein, Editorial Director at QSR and FSR magazines. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and for joining us today on the Whisking It All podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was awesome.
Feel free to check out Whisk.ai for more resources and schedule a demo with one of our product specialists to see if it's a fit for you.